Okay then, so this is all looking good, but there's one more thing I'd like to do, and that is to animate the score when a user clicks on submit. So instead of just showing the number right here, I'd like to animate it from 0 all the way to 50% really quickly. Now to do this, we're going to use a method again stored on the window object, and this time it's called setInterval. So setInterval is very similar to setTimeout, which we saw in the last video. Now what setTimeout did was fire a callback function after a certain amount of time, for example 3 seconds. Now setInterval is very similar, but what happens in a setInterval is the function keeps on firing every amount of time. So let me do a quick example. setInterval, and this takes a callback function as the first argument. So in here we'll just say something like console.log hello, and then we'll also say this should fire every 1000 milliseconds. So what this is going to do is fire first after 1 second. Then every 1 second after that, it's going to fire the function again. So whereas setTimeout only fires the function once, setInterval carries on firing the function every amount of time that we specify. So if I save this and preview, then we can see hello, and the numbers increase every second because it's logging hello over and over again to the console. So then, we're going to use this method to increase our score. Now before we do that, I want to show you how we can actually stop an interval. So if we do nothing, this is going to carry on and on and on and keep on firing the function, but at some point we might want to stop the interval. So what I'm going to do is just say let I equal to 0 to begin with. Then what I'll do is come down here and say I plus plus. So every time we fire this callback function, it's increasing I by 1. Now then, what I could do is check here if I is equal to 5, then what we're going to do is stop this interval. Now how do we actually stop an interval? Well, the first step is to actually store the setInterval function in some kind of variable. So I'll say const and call this timer and set it equal to setInterval. So now this interval function is stored in this variable. Now if we want to stop this setInterval function from firing, we can say clear interval, which again is a method stored on the window object. Then we pass in the interval that we want to clear, which we called timer. So then what's this going to do? Well, we're going to initialize I to be 0, then we're going to fire this function and store it in timer. Now the callback function fires after 1 second to begin with, and it increases I by 1, and it fires every 1 second thereafter until eventually I is equal to 5 right here, and then we're going to clear the interval, so it stops the interval from firing again. So let's save this and preview. We can see now we get the first 2, 3, 4, 5, but then we don't get any more because we cleared the interval. So this is the technique we're going to use to animate our score. So I'm going to delete all this stuff down here and then go up to the top, and we'll do our score animation right here. So first of all, we need that variable to keep track of how many times we're going through this callback function. So I'm going to call this output, and that is actually going to be 0 to begin with, but that's going to be the score increasing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. all the way to the user's score. And that's how many times the function is ultimately going to fire. If we get a score of 50, it's going to fire 50 times to animate through all the numbers. So we're setting that to be 0 to begin with. Then I'm going to say const timer is equal to setInterval, and then inside here we need a callback function, and inside this callback function, what do we want to do? Well, what we want to do is actually this thing right here. We want to get the results, and we want to output the score right here. So currently the score is going to be whatever, 75. Now we don't want to output the score, we want to output whatever this is right here, because it begins at 0 and then we're going to increase it up to the score as we go through. So I'm going to change that to output this thing. So every time this fires the callback, we're going to update what this is. So then that's the first step. Now what we need to do is say if the output is now equal to the score. Remember, the score is something like 25, 50 or 75 or 100. At some point it's going to reach that value, and at that point we want to clear the interval. So we'll say clear interval, and the interval is called timer. All right. And now if that's not the case, we do an else clause. If it's not yet reached the score, what we want to do is take the output and add 1 to it. So we also need to specify how often we want this to run. So I'm going to say 10 milliseconds, which is a fraction of a second, so that it animates really quickly. So let's just run through exactly what we've done here. Well, first of all, we set the output variable to be 0. Then we've created a timer which is equal to this set interval. Now the callback function right here is going to fire every 10 milliseconds. So every 10 milliseconds we're getting the result and the text content of the result, and we're setting it equal to whatever the output is at that time. Now to begin with, it's 0. So we output 0. Then we do this if check. Now if the output is equal to the score at that point, then we clear the interval and we don't need to do any more animation. If it's not, then we add 1 to the output. So now the output is 1, and then we run this again after another 10 milliseconds. So then we output 1 right here, and it's going to go all the way up to the score. And at the point when it reaches what value the score is, then it's going to clear the interval. I hope that all makes sense. So let me save this and preview this in a browser. I'm going to do 2 right answers, so we should get 50%. Submit, and now we can see that animates the numbers all the way up to 50. At this point, the output variable is equal to the score, so it stops that callback function, it clears the interval, and it stops the number right there. So there we go, my friends. That is our first little project done. Now, if you want, feel free to go off on a tangent and make your own quizzes, expand this quiz, and then if you want, you can leave links to your quizzes in the Q&A section, and we'll check those out.